Okay, I think we can get started. Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us on today's Local Lens. I'm really excited to have you all here with us tonight. If you haven't joined us before, my name is Ariana Blizzy, and I'm the Executive Director for the Federation of Community Councils. Before we get started, I am going to share with you guys some group agreements to kind of kick off our evening. These are something we do at the start of every session. The purpose of today's meeting, or sorry, today's session is to be a space for learning and conversation among members of community councils and the public. The goal is to dive deep into various governmental structures and topics within the municipality. As part of today, we are all agreeing to treat each other with respect, recognize our neighborhood's unique qualities, and allow everyone a chance to participate. Some logistical notes. We will be doing the presentation first, and then after the presentation, if you would like to ask any questions, you can either drop them in the chat or raise your hand. Please stay muted. We will call on you. We go in order of, hands up or chats. Keep your questions on topic and be concise. And please be considerate of everyone's time. At the end of the session, or probably during the session, there will be opportunities for contact information and other ways to connect on today's topic. So we encourage you to invite the presenters to your next community council meetings or get in touch with them. So today's topic is the missing middle housing ordinance, and we are joined today by Assembly members Aaron Baldwin Day and George Martinez. Thank you guys so much for being here. I'm so excited to learn more about this.
Yeah, thanks for having us, Ari. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Ari. Good to be here.
Yeah.
Oh, that was the handoff.
That was it. It's all you.
Hey,
All right. George, you want to kick us off?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, Ari. Good to be here. Thank you, Federation of Community Councils, and thank you, Member Baldwin Day, for joining in this presentation as well. I'm just going to open it up briefly with a little background from my vantage point, and then I think we're going to turn it over to Member Baldwin Day. I'll do a handoff to run us through the presentation, and then I think we'll have the opportunity for open discussion. And first and foremost, I wanted to situate this both locally and then nationally, just to give us a little context. And when I first got elected on the assembly, one of the first things I wanted to do was activate the East Anchorage District Plan. And in this district plan, things that were called like the Muldoon Transit Supportive Development Corridor. And then as we looked into that a little deeper, we first amended the Transit Supportive Development Map. And then I was one of the original co-sponsors of what became known as TSDO. And when TSDO, through the process, what we determined was we listen to learn, and then at the end of that process, the Assembly committed to continuing the work of looking at how to activate housing robustly, especially in corridors that had promises, that have the capacity, or that we need to just better understand and move in a very strong, robust direction. Missing middle housing is where we are today with that particular piece. Now, juxtapose that to the national conversation. We are at the forefront, if not right there, where everyone nationally is having this. And just next week at the National Association of Counties, I'm a vice chair of the subcommittee on housing. They'll be taking up a resolution to encourage the federal government and HUD to do more for missing middle housing options, including ADUs. So we are proceeding national conversations, but those national conversations bubble up from what's happening locally. So what's happening for us locally is exciting because it's part of the national conversation. And now how we get there to activate housing and opportunity across Anchorage is where this particular project, I think, is going to be inspirational and take us there. So I'll turn it over to Member Baldwin Day to take us into what does our missing middle housing opportunity look like, and how can we get there?
All right, thank you, Member Martinez. Many of you are probably aware that pre-assembly, a lot of the work that I was doing in the community was actually related to housing supply. That is one of the reasons that I actually chose to run for assembly was because of my interest in this very topic. And a lot of that was really due to my experience in the community. I was seeing firsthand the impacts of rising rent on young families, on our workforce, both during and post-pandemic. I was watching really gifted, really smart people leave our community, including selfishly my little brother, who left Anchorage to move to Seattle to find housing that he and his fiance could afford in a location that they wanted to be. There were folks who were looking for safe places to rent that they couldn't find, and I was interacting with friends who were writing these very emotional appeal letters to accompany their offers on homes that they were trying to purchase because they were hoping that that would make their offers stand out. And they had been advised by their realtor that there were so many offers coming in on homes in Anchorage that letters that outlined why a couple wanted to move into the neighborhood or why they wanted to raise their children there, or why they wanted to put down roots in Anchorage, was actually just standard now and part of the home ownership offer package. And that struck me as not a place that Anchorage wanted or needed to be. And I wanted to do something substantive about that. And so, really, the problem that we are trying to solve here boils down to two words, and that is housing supply. And really, this is the name of the game everywhere in the United States right now, with the rare exception. Communities everywhere are struggling with housing supply because we are not, in fact, the only community in the United States that has underbuilt and underbuilt significantly. And so this is the issue, right? And this supply question is what drives the affordability question. For those of you who remember back to high school economics, when you do not have sufficient supply, the price increases. And so the goal that we are trying to meet here with the missing middle housing opportunity overlay is really more housing types at more price points for more people. We would love for more people to be able to call Anchorage home, and for the people who are already living here and are doing so in overcrowded conditions to be able to have safe, stable places to live in at a price that they can access. And we really believe that the future of Anchorage depends on who can and cannot afford to live here. And so we want to ensure that safe quality housing is available and that it is affordable to our neighbors. And that encompasses a lot of questions, right? Is this property that's for rent or for sale? Does it meet the various needs of our residents at different life stages? Does it mean that my own kids can afford to come back to Anchorage after college? I hope the answer to that is yes, if that's what they choose. Does it mean that our seniors can age in place if that's what they choose? And all of this comes back around to our housing supply question. I want to draw a distinction today between what is affordable housing and what is attainable housing. So there are actually very technical definitions to these things. Affordable housing has a legal definition, and it's targeted towards our lower income neighbors who require some kind of housing subsidy, a federal housing subsidy, in order to access housing. And generally, those folks are at like 60% or below our area median income. And then you have attainable housing. Some people call it workforce housing, which is less of a technical term, but it generally means housing that's somewhere from 60 to 120% of the area median income, that those who fall in that income range can afford that type of housing. And then market rate housing is housing for folks who earn about 120% or greater of the area median income. And so when we're thinking about these housing types, it boils down to who can afford to live in what types of housing. And what we know right now is true in Anchorage is that we don't have enough attainable housing, that housing in that middle bandwidth, to meet the demand. Some might argue we don't have enough affordable housing either, but that's a separate question. We also know that working people in backbone industries are struggling. They are being priced out of the Anchorage housing market. We also know that housing that is attainably priced is often really old, and it requires significant reinvestment to get it back to functional. And Because of all of this, the rent or the mortgage is, to quote another organizer in the United States, the rent is too damn high. And so that is what we are attempting to work through. Now, I want to be clear, the missing middle housing opportunity overlay is only one piece of a much larger puzzle of policy interventions that are going to be needed in order to move the needle. But Member Martinez and I believe that this is a critical step. It is a critical piece of the constellation of solutions that we're going to need to work on and work on simultaneously. So this need has been evident since 2012. So there was a housing market analysis done in 2012, and the McDowell Group concluded, along with some economists from another entity, that there was not enough buildable land in Anchorage to accommodate future demand under historical development patterns and our current land use policies, and that the mismatch between demand and that availability was going to cause issues. And what they predicted in this report is that we would see more outmigration to the Mat-Su Valley, which has happened. They predicted that we would see more people moving out of Anchorage or moving out of the state entirely due to housing affordability. That has also happened. And they recommended a suite of solutions, and they also counted the cost of doing nothing. And it's interesting to me that upwards of, 10 years ago, 15 years ago now, we had folks telling us, hey, this is coming. This supply demand mismatch is coming, and we need to prepare for it. And so folks are asking, right, why are we in a housing crisis? How did we get here? And there are multiple factors that are at work. We do have limited land. As I mentioned, our housing stock is aging. The cost of infrastructure is going through the roof. And by infrastructure, I mean water pipes, sewer pipes, stormwater pipes, the cost of bringing electricity onto a site that doesn't have it, et cetera, the cost of constructing a road or a sidewalk where one doesn't exist, the cost of capital, the cost to actually get money to do construction work is at 12.5% actually. And we have some barriers in our code that make it difficult to build certain types of housing in certain places, generally missing middle housing. The cost of labor is going up. Cost of materials are rising, and that's was due in part to supply chain challenges during COVID, which we've never quite recovered from. And the cost of borrowing money to purchase a home is going up. All of these things are factors that contribute. But the only parts that are really under the control or levers that can be pulled by municipal government are these. They are where we use and how we use the land that's available to us. How efficient are we at our land use? And what kinds of regulatory barriers do we have in place that are keeping a lid on the types of housing that can functionally be built in Anchorage? And there's a question here about what we could do or what we can do about the age of our housing stock and the cost of capital. There are some solutions that I believe are well within the municipality's purview that could address these two, which is why I put red question marks next to them, because there are things we could work on, but that are not addressed really specifically by this ordinance. So that's a little bit of a stay tuned for those of you paying attention. But the two things at the top, how efficient are we at using our land, and what does our code say? What are the regulatory barriers in place? These are the things that we can, in fact, and are, in fact, working to address in this particular ordinance. So one of the things that we have, and I want to mention, by the way, that list I just showed you, that is a non-exhaustive list. There are other factors involved. So please don't take that as exhaustive. That's just a representative sample of reasons for our housing crisis. So essentially what has happened here in Anchorage is that the market has worked to produce expensive single-family homes, because that is what pencils out. That's what makes sense for builders and developers to build. It's what works with their bottom line. And what we're finding really every place else in America where a housing supply shortage is happening is that the solution is about the choice in housing. So supply and choice together are the thing that create affordability, and that resides in this missing middle type of housing. So if you imagine this as a spectrum, on the far left side is your single family home, your traditional single family home. And then on the far right hand side is your larger apartment buildings, like the Widener buildings. But these things in the middle are housing types that can fit within a sort of a more traditional neighborhood context. And these are the types of housing that we're looking to incentivize or to make more possible with the missing middle housing opportunity overlay. If you would like to do more reading about missing middle housing, I can happily provide you some links and things where you can read up on this housing type. A lot of folks start to think about missing middle housing as pertaining to like the people who are missing in the middle. And really what we're talking about is the type or the style of housing that's missing. So, as many of you are aware, right, we started this journey looking at our transit supportive corridors, and these are areas where we have said in our plans that potentially more dense housing and more types of housing could occur. They could be built, they could coexist with existing neighborhoods. And that is really that was the genesis, right, of the TSDO ordinance, which started as a very large, very ambitious policy, which we very quickly heard back from the community was too big, both literally and figuratively. Like the building heights were too large, the lot coverage was too much. People were like, "Whoa, this is not the solution. This is not where we would like to go in terms of implementing these corridors that are talked about in our plans." And so we took a step back and we said, "Okay, heard. We're going to retool this proposal." And we've now backed it down to how do we scale this in terms of a neighborhood? And what you might notice if you've read the ordinance is that we actually removed some of the density targets. We removed a lot of the language that was talking about, trying to get to a density that would actually support transit. And what we said was, hey, really the smallest bite of the apple here is missing middle housing. And if we can create opportunities in these transit supportive development corridors for that type of construction to occur, then we believe that, density will be an added bonus. Potentially, we might get to density that helps to support bus routes and things like that, but that's not going to be the focus. And that was the genesis for changing the language, was to really make it clear what is the point, what is the goal of this ordinance. And the goal is less about making transit possible and is much more focused now, very narrowly tailored on creating missing middle housing types. And again, I want to point us back to our plans, right? Because these are plans that were created and developed by this community, by Anchorage. We have our comprehensive plan, which is made up of the Anchorage 2020 and the Anchorage 2040 plans. And both of these sort of set vision. They say, here's where we think different types of development ought to go. And we have a blueprint that says, hey, in this metaphorical house, this is where we think these types of activities ought to occur. And then at some point, in order to make that blueprint real, we have to put it into action. We have to put it into practice. And that's a step that we have never taken with regard to the transit supportive corridors that are in our land use plan. The places where the community came together and said, hey, this is where we believe additional density ought to reside. We never took the step to make that density possible. And so when Member Martinez says, there have been promises made and promises deferred, that's a little bit of what we're talking about. That, we told the community, and actually the community came together and said, these are the places where we believe that there should be more active, walkable, vibrant communities. But we've never made the policy leap to say, okay, let's actually make that kind of development possible. We've not done that. And as a result, we've seen a lot of development patterns stagnate. So this ordinance essentially builds on a whole suite of past actions, not just our plans, which we are now hoping to move to implementation, but also other actions that have been taken by the municipality to try to create an environment in which new and different types of housing can exist and can exist at scale. One of those is in 2022, the Assembly removed required parking minimums. Now, this is a place where a lot of people say, well, wait a minute, there's no required parking. There's no parking being built anymore. That's not actually what's happened. And I'll address that in just a little while. But that removal of the requirement for parking minimums actually changed some things with respect to what could be built in terms of multifamily development. And then a follow on to that was allowing accessory dwelling units in all residential zones in 2023. Then in 2024, duplexes were allowed by right everywhere in the Anchorage Bowl in any zone, whether that was, residential R1, all the way up through R8. Then we reclassified three and fourplexes from commercial construction to residential construction because the permitting process for commercial construction was far more onerous, and it was making it really tough for triplexes and fourplexes to pencil out. And then we also took the step to pause some residential design standards and to say, maybe some of these requirements with respect to building articulations and exactly how much glass there is on a particular face of a building, maybe if we relax some of those and see what happens, we might see some other development happen, some new types of development actually work. And what we saw was that all of these things taken together began to move the needle. And so in 2023, we had 261 residential permits pulled. And then in 2024, we bumped up to 299 residential permits pulled. And then we bumped a little higher. And in 2025, we had 393 residential permits pulled, which is great. This is improvement, but it is not quite improvement at the scale that we need it. Because if we are, in fact, going to make that target of 10,000 homes in 10 years, and by the way, the clock is ticking, so I think now we're at 10,000 homes in 9 years, we have a lot more work to do. In just a second, I'll tell you why that 10,000 homes in 10 years number actually makes sense. But what I want to point out here is that this incremental movement, we've made some big policy moves. And we are just now seeing this incremental progress start to happen. And this is true elsewhere in the United States also, that when you are in a housing slump, overcoming inertia is really difficult. And it takes some pretty ambitious work on a policy level to see actual change start to happen on the literal ground. And so we're getting there. We're getting this wheel moving. And I hope that MHOP is the next step to see us gain a little bit more momentum. I do want to talk just for a minute about regulatory barriers, some of which we ourselves put in place. You can see that our building permits, what was happening in our building landscape, right? And there's this precipitous drop that happens after 2015. And what happened in 2015 is we had a whole new suite of Title 21 regulations take effect. And it really crushed the number of permits that were being pulled. We were on an upswing and then we dropped. And we have continued to sort of ride this wave down here at, about 300 permits or so, 300 to 400 permits pulled per year. And what is interesting about this is that we are now seeing that rezones that are allowing both regular homeowners and developers to rezones that are allowing people to create missing middle housing are becoming more frequent. What they have been and what some of them continue to be is expensive and time consuming. And so folks who are trying to address our housing shortage, whether as an individual or as an entity, are running into these regulatory barriers. And what this does, anytime you have something that lengthens the process between when someone can submit plans and break ground, that carrying cost, those months or sometimes years to get a rezone wrapped up or to see a permit through to completion adds cost to the eventual price that someone pays when they buy a home. So what we're hoping to do with the Missing Middle Housing Opportunity Overlay is to create some flexibility in our regulatory framework. So what does that really mean? What does that mean in plain language? It means that we want people to be able to be creative in how they place and orient a home on a property, whether it's a property that they own and they want to rehabilitate or perhaps add on to, or if it's a piece of property that has nothing on it, and this is infill development someplace in our city. We want there to be flexibility in building size and building footprint, in the number of units that can be built. We would love for people to not have to go through a rezone process in order to create a housing type that implements our plan. We would love for there to be resources spent differently. So rather than spending time paying for a rezone and paying for carrying costs, we want people to be able to put that money directly into the construction of the thing itself. There's a memo that I would direct your attention to for those of you who are interested in a deeper dive in this question of, what the rezone landscape has looked like. There's an entity here locally called S4 that actually assists people with moving their rezone through the process in our plan development services department. They wrote up a memo that basically describes what's been happening from their perspective and the number of rezones that they have actually walked through the process from start to finish to completion, and how many of those would not have been necessary if something like MHOP had been in place. And they've been keeping track of this. The data they have is from several years back, but particularly the last 9 months to 12 months is really interesting to look at. And I would be happy to drop a link to that memo. It's on the MHOP assembly page, and I will make sure that that gets in the chat so everyone can find it. So how does MHOP actually do this? What's the mechanism? Well, welcome to the Title 21 Dimensional Standards Table. For those of you who have yet to be victimized by Title 21, here it is. It is an extremely complicated and complex set of regulations. In fact, you can tell that I have become a full-scale planning nerd because I now have a physical copy of Title 21 that pretty much lives with me these days. And it is the regulatory framework that guides our planning decisions. That is not even our building code, the thing that governs how buildings can be built. That is just the how the building can be built is what's contained in that 4-inch binder. And what we're proposing to do is to say, okay, inside of this overlay, we are going to, number one, make sure that nothing about the underlying zone itself functionally changes. Nobody has to make changes to their property or to their plans as a result of this. This simply allows flexibility for the folks who want it. This says that basically in terms of the dimensions of a lot, those are governed by the existing rules we have for subdivisions. So rather than saying that a lot is going to be this size, MHOP says the lot can be anything that exists within the parameters of the subdivision tables. So that's why there's a reference there in that left-hand column. It says that the maximum lot coverage is allowable up to 70%, which means that if you are wanting to add additional ADUs to your property, if you're wanting to build a slightly larger footprint so that you can build a triplex, that all of that is allowable up to 70% of the total lot size. This is one of the things that allows for developments like cottage courts, like townhomes, like these missing middle types that we don't see as much in Anchorage as we would like. The side and rear setbacks are such that it allows for buildings like townhomes or condos, vertical condos, to be adjacent to each other if they share a common lot line. Otherwise, the side spacing is 5 feet, which is consistent with every other zone that we already have. And then the rear setback is 10 feet, or if there's a common lot line or an alley, then that setback is optional. And finally, there is a particular, there's a particular carve out that says if the underlying zone is R1, then the maximum building height stays the same as it is right now. And every place else, the building height could be up to 40 feet. So an increase of 10 feet. What we intend for this to do is offer more flexibility, offer some reduction in risk to say, okay, if someone is interested in building something different or creative or new or interesting on their property, the risk of that creativity is diminished. And it means that we are making more efficient use of the land we already have, because we functionally cannot afford to continue building only large lot single family homes and meet the moment in terms of housing affordability. these are the outcomes that we hope for. We hope for neighborhood scale multifamily housing, missing middle housing that fits into the surrounding neighborhoods, that's compatible with what is on either side. And so this could look like stacked triplexes, stacked duplexes, side by sides, cottage courts, condos, townhomes. All of these types are made possible by the different dimensional standards available in this overlay. I am mindful of the time, so I think what I might do is move to the why of this and then take some questions, if that's all right with everybody. And I'll be sure that the slides make it into your hands. I know Ari does a fantastic job of making sure folks get the resources from these presentations. And so I wanted to take a moment and address the question of population outmigration, because this is a question I've gotten quite a lot with this particular ordinance, and also with the 10,000 homes in 10 years question. So people are like, well, why do we have a housing shortage? Aren't people leaving? And it turns out that yes, people are leaving, but the shape of the household is changing. And so our population projections, back when we did them in our first comprehensive plan, these were estimates that we thought were going to carry us through to 2020. We thought that we were going to have about 79%, we're going to have 21% more people than we actually have. But we are also really close. We're much closer to the target of the number of households we thought would be living in Anchorage when we wrote our comprehensive plan. And what's interesting about this is it is a household that requires a house. And so what we're seeing is that the size of the family is shrinking. We have more single people, more couples with no children who are living in Anchorage, and they are households unto themselves, and they are still demanding housing. Another important piece of this puzzle is that we already have overcrowding in Anchorage at about 70% or 7%, excuse me. Our most recent census data showed that we were overcrowded, and just overcrowding alone requires that we have an additional supply of housing than what we have right this minute. So what I'd like to show you is that, in our 2012 market analysis that I alluded to earlier, it was projected that we were going to need 18,000 new housing units between 2010 and 2030. And the total number of dwelling units that we've permitted in that time, since that time, so from 2011 to 2025, is only 6,000, which means that if that initial population projection was correct, we would actually need closer to 12,000 new units. That's if we adjust that for the actual number of households we have, if we adjust that number down based on what's actually happened in terms of our population, that's still 10,000 units that we need in Anchorage. And this is based on a market analysis that was extremely comprehensive in scope, which again can be made available to you if you'd like to look at it. So 10,000 homes in the next 10 years actually puts us out beyond 2030 in terms of housing demand. We are already behind where we thought we needed to be, and then some. These are some housing needs in Midtown alone. This is from the yet to be released Midtown District Plan. This was research that was done by Agnew Beck, just to talk about, for the Midtown District, what kinds of housing would be needed. This is from last year, so these are 2025 numbers. Somewhere in the neighborhood of 1,200 units were needed for lower income households alone. So that's 375 new and 819, almost 820 rehabilitated units. So we're talking about pretty significant demand, and this is only in Midtown. So I put this before you to say the data bears out this concept of a housing shortage. It is not something that can be solved by just outmigration alone. And in fact, I think if we rely upon outmigration to solve our housing crisis, we will end up in a different sort of crisis altogether. And that is really the collapse of our city. Quick little table to show you the age of our housing stock and how much of our housing stock was built in the 1960s and the 1980s. I personally live in a 1969 house, split level, that's still standing. But what we've been doing for the last several decades is we've been recycling essentially the same houses through our housing market. And that as any economist will tell you, is unsustainable when it comes to actually stabilizing population. We also know that the purchasing power of our community is dropping. So the average price of a home has increased 88% in the last 15 years. And the purchasing power has only increased by 33%. That is a huge delta that we cannot solve for unless we work to bring down the cost of housing by adding to our supply. And then finally, who is this for? Like, why should we be concerned about the purchase price of a home? It's because the people that we rely on to keep our city functional are folks who are looking for this type of housing and they cannot find it. These are the starting salaries right now at ASD, at APD, over at Prov and Regional, and at our fire department. These are the starting salaries, and these are the folks that I want to retain in Anchorage, that Member Martinez wants to retain in Anchorage. These are folks that we don't want to leave because the rent is too damn high, and yet that is what we continue to see happening. And why that is happening is because of purchasing choice. So a healthy housing market says that folks who are making, about $75,000 a year, that entry level sort of job positioning, should be able to afford roughly half of the homes on the market at any given time. That was true in 2019. And now that share has dropped to about 20%. The average person in this income bracket can only afford a fifth of the homes that are available for sale. And the proportion of homes that are available to them at these sort of attainable housing price points is dropping rapidly. I think I will, let's see. One facet of this that I do want to speak to before I take questions is to say that there is a life cycle to housing. And I'm going to use myself as an example. So when we moved to Anchorage, back to Anchorage, I should say, I moved back in 2009 with my family. We bought a home in 2010. We were very, very lucky to find the house that we have. We bought a rather large single-family home with an ADU for $317,000. Our home has appreciated over $200,000 since then. And if we were to try to repurchase the home that we currently have, we would be hard pressed. We would be house rich and cash poor if in fact we were put in that position. Now my children are getting ready to head out to college. We're about to be empty nesters. And I would love to downsize. I would love to move out of this 4-bedroom, 2-bath with an ADU and a large extra room downstairs. I would love for another family to move into this house and to take advantage of it the way that my family of 5 has for the last upwards of a decade. But as I look around, there's nothing for me to downsize into that doesn't cost as much as my house. And so I am stuck. And rather than moving through this housing life cycle where I am in a large single-family detached home and I could move into something smaller, but it doesn't make financial sense for me to do so because of the market pressures that exist. This is creating a backlog. It's creating this squeeze where folks who would love to move in to the house that I currently own cannot do so because I'm still in it. And this is happening all around the housing life cycle because we do not have enough of these missing middle housing types that give people an affordable off-ramp and make space for houses to be reused and repurposed by new families who are in new life stages. And so as we're thinking about this, I want us to also consider not just the housing types that we're developing, but the people who we want to live here, the folks that we want to retain, the people that we want to put down roots and be with us for the long haul, be our neighbors, and be the folks who continue to build Anchorage into the future. I think that is a great place to stop and say and take questions. There's 2 slides I will draw your attention to. One of them is just a review of where we've been, why we are where we are, and then a slide that talks about other things that are happening with respect to housing policy in the muni. Again, because the missing middle housing opportunity overlay is not a silver bullet. It is not a big change, It is a very methodical, reasonable change that fits with our current trajectory of planning and professional land use, and is also not a new concept. It's one that's overdue. It is overdue for us to implement and to use as a tool to see our city thrive into the future. And I will stop there and take questions.
Thank you. Thank you so much. We do have a number of questions in the chat. As a reminder, if you do have a question, you're welcome to drop it in the chat. I've been keeping track as they have been going during the presentation. You also are welcome to raise your hand. But there were two small questions that I did kind of want to start with. So somebody asked, when we talked about transit supportive development, could you define what transit means in that scenario? And then also, there was a question about what you mean by overcrowding. So just some like definitions so we're all on the same page.
Yeah, great question. So transit, we're talking about like public transit types. So whether that is something like anchor rides or our bus system, our people mover bus system, the types of transit that run on some kind of a fixed schedule.
And then overcrowding. Do you
Yeah,
ref?
overcrowding.
Yeah.
Sure. So overcrowding is it's actually a census definition, and so it is it's any housing that is not sufficient for the needs of the household. And so when we take a census, people are asked, about the size of their family and also about the size of the home or how they are currently housed. And there's a spectrum of like very overcrowded to somewhat overcrowded to not overcrowded, right? There's a range. And Anchorage right now is sitting at 7% overcrowding, which if you do the math on how many households that really impacts, let's see, I think we're sitting at I can find the number of households that impacts. But it's over 1,000 households that are actively like that don't have a housing that's acceptable for their household size.
And I'll just jump in and say one of the folks who helped put the language into the plans from a while back told me that they literally thought about where the people mover routes were because they were thinking about where the working families who use those routes were. And so these goes back to where these kind of corridors of promises to develop that haven't really been developed, and to the extent that they've been languishing, there's an overlap there as well.
Thank you so much. We did have a question from David. Why not expand MMHOP area to the entire municipality and allow the city to reap the benefits wherever owners or developers want to do it so they don't have to go through the rezone process if they're outside the current MMHOP area?
Yeah, that's a really great question. So one of the things that has been true in Anchorage almost since ever is our tendency to try to push development to the edges. And one of the things that we know is true about the way that cities operate is that you get walkability, you get some of these things that we enjoy about other places when we go to visit larger cities. You get that when you have density along your most traveled routes. And so that's one of the reasons that we felt like using transit supportive corridors as the vehicle, as the tool to think about where missing middle housing ought to go, is that's why we got there. The second piece of that is that during the home initiative, which was the part or the piece of legislation that made duplexes legal by right everywhere in the city, there was a lot of public feedback that said that is too much, it's too broad, it's changing too many things at once. And we took that feedback to heart when we thought about both TSDO and then MHOP to say, okay, the community is asking us for a more tailored solution. They're asking us for something that's more specific. So let's deliver on that. And let's use the transit supportive corridors already in our plans as the vehicle, sorry, no pun intended, to make that happen. So those are the two reasons why.
Thank you so much.
Sure.
Jana had a question. Has the assembly made a text amendment to allow removable units in the proposed MMHOP area?
Relocatable dwellings?
She said removable units, so I don't want to misspeak for her.
So if we're talking about relocatable dwelling units, then yes, those are allowable inside of the overlay.
Great. There was a question on
And
measurable.
I'll
Oh,
just
yeah,
follow up on
George.
that and say, and you can also, to right now, if you have a permanent foundation, you can, as long as the portable or relocatable unit is on a permanent foundation, you can use that today anywhere an ADUs are available.
That's correct.
Okay.
So in any residential zone, you can put a relocatable dwelling unit on a foundation already by right.
Yeah.
Awesome. And would you remind us a little bit, where is the ordinance in the process? Because I think part of the question was, has a text amendment been introduced? And we're not even there, right?
Correct. Yeah. Member Martinez, you want to speak to where we are in the legislative process?
The item is set for the September, the second meeting of September. Yeah, I guess I forget the date off the top of my head, Member Baldwin Day. So you want to remind us. But it's set for the next meeting in September, for a meeting in September, but we've already intended as the sponsors post, to keep the public hearing open until the first meeting of October. So we'll have two bites at the public hearing meeting from September into October, because we also know community councils will be convening often in August through September, and by the time they get to October.
And I
Um,
think that meeting date is September 15th.
okay, yeah,
Correct.
So that's
and
okay.
then the
And then
first meeting.
Yeah, and then the first meeting in October is the third, unless I'm mistaken. So those will be the two public hearing options. So this has been introduced, as Member Martinez said. We've held one work session on this item. We've had some really great suggestions to come through in terms of amendments already, and so there may be some additional work to do. We heard loud and clear with TSDO that there were too many changes to track. So we are not doing that with this iteration. We are going to try to do better and make sure that we're very precise with when and how those amendments are introduced. But there will be no changes made before that initial public hearing, so that we can be sure to hear from the public on this version before we make any alterations.
Thank you. So, question from Esther on measurable impact. There's a map of empty lots in the 2040 plan. If we overlay the TSDO map on top of that map, it should be easy to calculate a potential number of housing units that could be built both with and without MHOP. I'm curious if one, anyone has tried to calculate that, and two, what the potential is in multifamily residential zones, specifically R3 and R4.
Yeah, that's a great question. So that overlay does exist. Part of why it's really difficult to do that calculation is because not all of the lots that were identified are actually developable, and some of them are only developable with a very significant investment of capital for water and wastewater. So not all of them have utilities on site, and there would be significant expense to bringing those utilities on site. The further complication there is that one of the things we think is a feature of the missing middle housing opportunity overlay is that it does not prescribe a total number of housing units or a target density per acre, which makes it really difficult to project. I mean, I suppose we could do something like, if on every lot that already has utilities that's inside of the overlay, you built a fourplex. Then maybe we could get like an idea, but even that would be conjecture, because every single one of these developments is going to have its own challenges, its own character, its own intent, right? For some folks, they might only want a duplex. For some, they might say, hey, I'd love to put a six unit cottage court on this same property. So it'd be really difficult to predict a total output of units without making some really arbitrary decisions about what kinds of development were going on all of these parcels. Could be an interesting exercise for someone who does like AI modeling. That is not my expertise. So if there's anybody in the room that like wants to, take a bite out of that with with some kind of predictive data modeling, great. But that would be very challenging for us to do. And I think our planning staff would be very, very upset with us if we asked them to try.
And Ariane, I wanted to go back to just the question about the transit and kind of versus, or why these corridors versus kind of citywide as well. In the language of the ordinance, we also referenced another ordinance, which was AR 2025-159, which has four pillars of kind of our Anchorage economic development framework. And two of those pillars were stackable return on investment. So where should investments go where the stackability of that investment kind of grows exponentially? And in these corridors where there's planning, where there's infrastructure, those are some of the options there. But then the other one was preemptive resiliency. And I just wanted to be clear, like we're talking about housing as it relates to meeting the needs, but but housing itself is also about making sure our community is more resilient to shocks that disrupt housing supply. And so this is also that type of urgency, and we've embedded that value into the resolution itself so that we have both the meeting the market needs, but also meeting that no one's coming to save us if we have massive disruption. And the more housing we can get on the market, the more we can rehabilitate from some of the crumbling housing stock that we have. Overall, the more resilient our community is going to be as well.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And I want to add
Go
a
ahead.
little note to that too. I mean, there are some pressures that we know are coming on our housing supply, and one of those is the military buildup at J-Bear. We know
Yes,
that there will
yeah.
be we know that there will be over 200 households coming to Anchorage in the next 18 months. So that's additional pressure on our housing supply. And for those of you who are interested in the math with respect to how many households are unsuitably housed due to overcrowding in Anchorage, that's 7,560 households as of 2020. So
And, and,
that's
and
7,000 households that could be in housing that are currently doubled up in other housing that's unsuitable.
Right. And we're still going to get an influx. And just the folks that think about other communities and like the fears and concerns, yes, be concerned about how it didn't work in other places so that we can try to do things better than what we've seen in other places. We don't want to repeat mistakes. We want to have the way things could work better in our community. But, activating what a lot of visionaries had saw in plans is what we're doing now. We are trying to implement what a lot of folks had saw was where we needed to be heading in the first place.
We had a question from a couple people about how to address this new housing from becoming short-term rentals. Is there anything in MHOP that talks about that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So really, the options available to us in terms of limiting or placing a limit on what a private property owner can do with their property really only comes into play when there's municipal money involved. So, the like deed restrictions, those kinds of things, right? When someone is building a home or building a house and they're receiving some sort of financial kickback, then that is where the municipality can say none of this can be used as a short-term rental. And so, for example, that's a feature in the multifamily tax abatement. So if you are receiving the multifamily tax abatement, or if you're receiving the derelict property rehab tax abatement, it is explicit in both of those pieces of legislation that they cannot be used as a short-term rental. So within the MHOP structure, because this doesn't talk about money, there's not really a lever for us to say. Also, nothing in MHOP can be a short-term rental. But if someone were to pair MHOP with that multifamily tax abatement, then yes, then there is a prohibition on any of those units being short-term rentals.
Thank you. Somebody, Lee asked a question. Does the now law 21st Century Road to Housing Act encourage this type of MHOP building through financial supports for urban areas taking this approach?
Yes, it absolutely does. And here's what's fascinating about that. So, the Federal Road to Housing Act, and thank you very much for this question, that particular act actually resituates how communities can use federal housing and urban development money, which we receive. That's the CDBG, Community Development Block Grant, which is one of the grants that we can use for things like infrastructure, pipes in the ground, electric lines, sidewalks, those kinds of things. And so in every community that receives these federal funds has to put together a plan to say, here are the challenges in our community, and here's how our CDBG funds will be used to solve these problems. And in every single one, almost every single one of our CDBG action plans for years, we have talked about regulatory barriers to creating this kind of housing, and we've never actually done anything about it. And so, we've named it to the federal government to say this is a barrier, and it's a barrier that we have control of. And so, one of the things that I am aware is going to be happening is more scrutiny on those CDBG action plans. Have communities taken steps to overcome the barriers that they have within themselves? And as part of the Road to Housing Act, the fact that it's opening up more ways that this kind of funding that can be used, and it's actually putting more money into that particular federal funding bucket, means that we need to start dealing with some of these internal barriers that we know are ours to solve, and really like be able to show the feds, hey, we've done our part. Now we need your financial investment to increase.
And just to flag again, the National Association of Counties, one of the folks who heavy lobbying on behalf of counties to advance that. And in that particular piece of legislation, the 21st Century Road to Housing, they also really looked at one of the other values we embedded in our language, which was again disaster recovery and resilience, because it's really people have learned from places like Lahaina that when housing stock is already fragile and you have massive disruption, how do you rebuild is the other question. So we're talking about how do you get housing to meet needs, but also when those housing get rapidly eliminated, how do you rebuild? So the federal government is dealing with all of those at the same time.
Thank you. Thank you. So we have time for just a couple more questions. Can you speak to the fear some folks have of traffic congestion if more housing is built in all these areas?
That's a great question. So, I think I want to offer that there's a little bit of a misconception in our community about what zoning does and what plan review does. So zoning just says, hey, here's the options. Like here's the menu of things that you could build in this particular area. And that's one form of certainty for a community, right? That's the certainty that says a cement plant isn't going to go in next door. Like I live in a residential area, I can reasonably expect that like an industrial use is not going to come in next to me. So it's kind of this big picture protection. But then when you actually have a plan, right? When someone has blueprints, they have drawings, they have design, and they take it to the permit center, there's this second layer of protection for the community. And that's where you have fire safety weigh in. They look at building spacing. They look at, if this is a new subdivision, can a fire truck actually get down this road and turn around? They look at fire separation. They do look at traffic impact. So our municipal traffic engineer and his team take a look and say, is this development going to substantively change the traffic patterns in this community? Should we require something different or something else? And this is where the right-of-way people weigh in and they say, well, hey, based on this kind of development, we don't know that there's enough right-of-way for snow storage. We need the design to change so that we can actually store snow appropriately. There are all of these parts of the municipality that look at the plan itself and they weigh in about the neighborhood impacts. It's already illegal to have negative stormwater implications on your neighbor's property. It's already illegal to build something that disrupts your neighbor's well water, right? All of these things get looked at the plan review level, which is not zoning, right? That's step two. And I think a lot of people don't realize that that's actually part of the reason why plan review takes so long, is because there are all of these different departments and all of these different professionals that look at the plans themselves and say, okay, how does this particular development impact the surrounding area? And what do we need to ask this developer to do to minimize or mitigate those impacts on the neighborhood? So that does happen. It just doesn't happen with zoning. It happens afterward when there's actually something on the table that's concrete that people can look at and say, oh, they're building a fourplex. So these are the impacts that we need to consider. And then they do.
Thanks,
Does that
George.
help?
Yeah,
Is that helpful
yeah, George.
clarification?
Anything you want to add to that question?
No, just to make sure, I think to dispel one of the things that possibly is in the chat, just there's everyone's still governed by the rules. So within the R1, the home initiative gave people the ability to have up to 3 units, which is how you turn your home into duplexable and an ADU essentially. An ADU is available everywhere, and what we described even on this call was that an accessory dwelling unit could be a relocatable unit on a permanent structure. But that doesn't mean that there's an unlimited amount of those things that could go on any property. There still is the limits are still within the certain limitations for the property type, right? And so they're not unlimited just because you can roll on and have enough room on your quarter of an acre property to build a park, for example, with several pads. That wouldn't happen even today. So I just wanted to establish that it's really still governed by the by right of the particular property, but everyone now has a by right to duplex, and all R1s have a by right to essentially have 3 dwelling units on the property.
Yeah,
Thank
I
you.
think I think it's really important. I want to be clear about this. No, MHOP doesn't change anything about existing safety parameters in Title 23. It doesn't change anything about it doesn't change anything about plan review. It doesn't change anything about permitting. All of those things still remain true. And so, to the example of, could you just pack an entire lot full of tiny homes? No. The fire marshal would tell you immediately no, because that's not appropriate in terms of fire safety and separation between buildings. And so, there is an upper limit to what could be built on any given lot, based on the parameters that already exist in Title 23.
Great. I just want to jump in because we are at time. I will give you like 30 seconds if you have any closing things you want to say really quick to everybody.
Well, I'll say hello first and goodbye. Um, I think what's really important is folks like myself, and I think I could speak at least on behalf of my co-sponsor, we're really still listening, learning, opening. I think we have kind of an understanding of of this goal, and I think Member Baldwin Day did a remarkable job today describing that goal and the attainability of getting to that goal. But we have just such a complexity of challenges in our community that taking a bite out of and a step forward is really where we hope this missing middle housing overlay, opportunities overlay, can help us take the next step forward. We've taken some major advancements. We're seeing the needle tick, and I think this is a very positive step forward. We are going to take a full package and see how it goes, as Member Baldwin Day described. But it's exciting to know that we're also where the nation is, and we're doing some things that we've already mentioned that are cutting edge, that are giving us a way forward. And I look forward to the opportunity where we can reduce our car trips because we have this connectivity in our communities that I enjoy and want to see more about it. So I look forward to these progress opportunities in our community, and I'm grateful for this opportunity to be with everybody today. Member Baldwin Day, take us home.
Oh, you're on mute.
Thank you. So I've just put a link in the chat. Because I am interested in hearing feedback on this. I would love, I just want people to know that I held some listening sessions. They were 20 minutes, one-on-one with me, just to talk about this particular overlay. I did a couple of days worth in June, and I was really surprised at how many people wanted to come talk to me about this for 20 minutes. So those sessions filled up really quickly. So I've started a wait list. So I intend to hold more of those listening sessions in July, later on this month. So there's a link in the chat to that wait list. If you click through, you can add your name, your contact information, and once I have those dates and times nailed down and ready to open for registration, I will notify you directly if that's something that you would like to take advantage of. I also want to let folks know that I'm happy to hear from you via email. However, it is pretty if you really want to get in touch with me about this, I suggest that you actually reach out by phone. And I am putting my phone number in the chat so that you have that as well. I would love to hear from you, and hopefully we can continue this conversation going forward into September. And I just want to thank all of you for the time. Stay tuned and keep your eyeballs on the housing webpage for the Assembly, because that is where new information will be added, including an FAQ that treats with a lot of the questions that have been asked tonight and also in other sessions.
Yes, thank you guys so much. Thank you again to our presenters. We will be having more local lens events scheduled soon. So please keep your eyes peeled and make sure you're signed up for our newsletter, Neighbor to Neighbor. You can register on our website, communitycouncils.org. And this and all of our previous local lenses are on YouTube, youtube.com/at community councils. And if you have an idea for local lenses that you would like to see in the future, you can email us at info@communitycouncils.org. Thank you guys all again and have a lovely evening. Goodbye.